Dylan, can you say, what is up, everybody? Say, Dylan Rupert is here. Say, dropping some knowledge on the fall of communism. Can you wave? Say, bye-bye. Dill. Psst. Let's try this again. What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to Unit 6 of the Modern World. This is on Part 2, which is the revolutions in the Cold War. This is actually the 5th section of this, and this is the end of the Cold War. So we're all talking about 1900 to present here. Just a quick reminder, in the last video we talked about totalitarianism, and Stalin and Mao and attempting to industrialize the country. Soviet Union successful. China not so much. And what we see in the late 70s, early 80s is a change. A lot of changes going on here. So let's get into this first. Let's start with China. This is Deng Xiaoping. And just a reminder, last name first, first name last. So in China, so Deng is the name that we usually refer to him as. So if you're ever writing about him, you can just call him Deng. He is the leader in China after Mao. Mao dies in the late 70s, and there's kind of this struggle for power. And Deng is the one who takes over. And he's kind of considered to be a modernizer. He recognizes that Mao failed with his industrialization. Mao's Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution were pretty much failures, and it led to the death of a lot of people in China. So Deng is going to attempt again to industrialize China, except he is going to be successful. And a little synthesis going forward here is China is still considered to be this country that is industrializing. They're in the process of fully being industrialized, and they're pretty much there already. So in China, Deng is going to introduce what he refers to as the 4 modernizations. So they're going to attempt to modernize China in 4 different ways. One is in industry, which would be heavy industry, so electricity, coal, iron, etc. 2 is defense, so improving the military, so whether it is improving on tanks and guns and ballistic missiles and all that good stuff. And agriculture is number 3, so improving farming techniques in order to feed those people who are going to be providing for the workers in the factories. And last but not least is science, because with science you need for all the other 3. So you need better agriculture, you need science and defense and industrialization as well. So here's the deal with this. This is the big change here. This is what you need to remember about Deng. He is going to change the economic system in China. Under Mao, it was communist. So when I say communist, I mean the government did and decided all what people could buy, how much you could buy, what you need to produce. He is going to shift to a capitalist economy. So when I say capitalist, I mean the people are going to now be able to have some free markets. They're going to be able, laissez-faire, hands off. So the government is going to allow for businesses to operate almost freely. It's not full free market because the government is still around and stuff, but now you can open up a business. You can try and sell things for a profit. You can make as much money as you can. So what we're going to see is it's not really about communism anymore in China. That's not really the focus anymore. It's about shifting towards more of a capitalist economy under Deng. And it's successful because what motivates people is making money, and you make money through that competition, and that's what capitalism allows. And so a couple things here. While he allows these economic freedoms, they still do not really allow political freedoms. And in 1989, as these economic freedoms are increasing, students in China in a place called Tiananmen Square are actually going to protest. And they're going to say, we want more democracy. You're giving us economic freedom. We want political freedom. We want the ability to elect our leaders. We want the ability to know that we have freedom of speech and freedom of press and freedom of religion and all those things that come with a democracy. And what the government does is they shut these protests down, mainly in a violent manner. So you can see these are the student protests. Look at all these people, and this is in a place called Tiananmen Square in China. This right here, guy is known as Tank Man. He's literally standing in front of the tanks, almost daring them to run over him because these tanks are getting ready to go in and stop these protests. The tanks eventually go around. Another story for another day, but this protest, although it's attempted and it shows that people desire democracy, it is really a failure. Today in China, there's really few political freedoms that's still to this day. So we're talking almost 20 years later, or 30 years later, we still don't have these political freedoms in China. So if you ever go to China, there's a limit on speech, press, assembly. Internet access is very much limited of what you can search. There are certain keywords that are banned by the government itself. So if you're on a Wi-Fi network, or a 3G or 4G LTE network in China, they're going to limit these words. So you can't search, for example, freedom or enlightenment or John Locke in China today. However, they are industrialized, like I said. So on one hand, we do improve the economic system. Politically, they're really going to stay the same. And that's kind of a little hint here for a change in continuity, or maybe a turning point of what changes. Economically, we change. Politically, we're going to stay the same. We also have an issue in the Soviet Union. In the early 80s, same time as Deng is going on. So you can see this wave of freedom kind of sweeping through the world. In the early 80s, the Soviet Union is going broke. They've spent a lot of money on the space race, on the arms race, and really what happens inside the Soviet Union itself is they're not producing enough food. And just a reminder, that term hangry really comes up a lot when things are going to change politically. And the leader here is Mikhail Gorbachev. This is him. Mikhail meaning Michael. So this is Mikhail Gorbachev. He is, again, kind of like Deng, this progressive, this guy who wants to change this system that's been in place for so long. And he's going to implement two policies. One, similar to Deng, almost identical to Deng. He implements a policy of perestroika. And perestroika is to allow more capitalism, allow people to open their own businesses, a little more hands-off, laissez-faire, to allow people to change the economic system and allow people to buy what they want, sell what they want. So if you want to buy jeans, for example, as simple as that is, prior to this in the Soviet Union, you couldn't, because the government said what you could and couldn't buy. Now you can buy what you want. Also, unlike Deng, this is different from Deng. So again, compare and contrast, little thought process here on our historical thinking skills. He implements a policy called glasnost, where he does allow more freedoms, where he lifts the restrictions of freedom of the press and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. Now, keep in mind, for years in the Soviet Union, people were really not given these freedoms. Now, all of a sudden, they have them, kind of like a teacher who is like really, really strict in the classroom. And then you leave that class and you're like, oh my goodness, now I can say whatever I want. Or when the sub comes in and you're like, oh, thank God they're not here. Let's go crazy. That's kind of what happens in the Soviet Union, where before we were really strict, now we're going to allow more freedoms, and people are finally able to kind of lift this burden of being limited of what they can say. And what we see around the world of this impact of glasnost is countries are going to start demanding their independence. These satellite countries that we talked about behind the Iron Curtain are going to slowly get their independence in the 80s, because they're going to be allowed to protest, they're going to be allowed to organize, and these countries are going to gain their independence. So a lot of these satellites are going to become democratic countries in the late 80s, and we slowly see the dissolution or the reduction of the size of the Soviet Union and their impact. One of the key events in this is in November of 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. So the wall that separated East and West Berlin and was really the symbol of the Cold War comes down, and in the city of Berlin in Germany. And when this wall comes down, it's kind of the sign that the Soviet Union is about ready to fall. And it was an impromptu night. People just opened the borders of East and West Germany and East and West Berlin, and people could travel freely for the first time. And then people literally tear the wall down. As a result of all of this, we see little pieces of nationalism, and countries are going to start breaking away from the Soviet Union. Not just these countries that were under their control, that were supposedly independent, but also just part of the Soviet Union. So we see these Eastern European countries gaining their independence from Russia. So we got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. We got the Ukraine here coming down, Georgia, Armenia, all the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. So what has happened to the Soviet Union or Russia, it is slowly shrinking. And in 1991, in December, communism in the Soviet Union officially falls, and communism in the Soviet Union ends. And what happens is these countries are independent, and this becomes just known as Russia. So communism is over in the Soviet Union in 1991. They start implementing some democratic ideas, but keep in mind, it's been 70 years of communism and of this kind of strict rule until the end under Gorbachev. So it's hard to just suddenly become a democracy. And what we see today in Russia is, this is the leader of Russia today. His name is Vladimir Putin. What we see in Russia is there is some capitalism, there is some democracy, but the democracy is less freedoms than you see in the United States. So there's really a limit on, like, for example, the freedom of the press. So there's a government-run news organization, and they publish most of the information in Russia. And if you publish something counter to that, you can find yourself in trouble or arrested. If you speak out against the government, you can still get arrested depending upon how bad that is. But they are a capitalist economy. You can buy and sell what you want. There's a lot of laissez-faire going on. And in terms of Vladimir Putin, this is kind of a famous picture of him riding the horse with his shirt off. He's a former colonel in the KGB, which is the secret spy organization from the Soviet Union. He gets elected president from 2000 to 08. Then he becomes prime minister from 08 to 12. And then he's back to being president again because there's a two-term limit in Russia. So he serves for 2 terms. And then he becomes prime minister and shifts all the power to the prime minister position. And then after his term is up there, he can go back to being president again for 2 terms. So he will most likely, well, he is going to be president of China or Russia until 2020. So he's really kind of this old school guy who has brought back a little bit of that Cold War tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. So just a couple images here. So this is Russia. These are all the countries that used to be under Soviet control that are going to gain their independence. This is a picture of Gorbachev, a little cartoon. This is the communist symbol in the Soviet Union, the hammer and the sickle, and it's broken. This is supposed to be Gorbachev. This is the Soviet Union. He sprinkled in a little democracy. It shrunk. We got the 1990 communist revolution leaders. This is Castro, and communism has fallen everywhere, so he's saying maybe I'm just early. And then last but not least, we have the Soviet Union sinking and all of these lifeboats just kind of getting off here. The emergency boats are all these countries that are going to get their independence. And then last but not least, we have the communist paradise. We have Stalin up here and Lenin. And this is Karl Marx with the communist symbol. And then these guys are bringing communism to its grave. So that's what I got. Communism is over. In the next videos, we're going to kind of jump back just a little bit post-World War II. But that's the end of the Cold War. That's the end of the communism. That's all I got. Have a good day.